welcome back to the Chicana Therapist podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Xochitl Alamillo, and I'm very excited because today I have only my second guest on the podcast, and her name's Cristina. I would love, Cristina, if you would introduce yourself to our listeners, because you would do a better job than me.
Thank you, Xochitl. So my name is Cristina, and I am a psychiatric nurse practitioner and a coach. I have been a nurse for 18 plus years, and the past 5 have been specializing in psychiatry. And just recently, about 6 months ago, I started with a coaching business where I work with first gens on dealing with burnout prevention, burnout recovery, anything around burnout.
Awesome. I would love to hear more about you, about where you grew up, what your background is. Are you okay sharing that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born in Morelos, Mexico, and I immigrated when I was 11. And I lived in San Diego most of my life. I went to nursing school there, and the subject of psychiatry was very interesting to me. And I also saw the need. I saw the need in our community. There were not a lot of psychiatric providers. When the time came, that a loved one needed help, navigating that process was very challenging. In spite of the fact that I am a nurse, that I know how to navigate the system, it's challenging to navigate it. So I can't imagine how it is, when someone who does not have the background that I have, and they're trying to navigate that system by themselves.
So you kind of answered my next question, which was what brought you to psychiatry specifically, but what made you want to become a nurse 18 years ago?
Wow, it's such a long time ago. I was a teenage mom. I didn't know the show. I didn't know I was pregnant, so that was me. I found out I was pregnant, I think 2 weeks before I had my daughter.
No way!
Yes!
Really?
Yeah.
That could be an episode all on its own.
Absolutely. Yeah, because, the odds were against me, right? The odds were against me that, I was going to be able to finish high school. I was still in high school. That I was going to be able to go to college, get my associate degree, and then from that move on to the bachelor's, the master's program, and then eventually, deciding to specialize in psychiatry because I saw the need. And then also, but I really began working at it when the pandemic started. Because you see, I had just gotten a job as an adjunct professor for an LVN program. But in the very first week or second week that I started working, that's when the pandemic was declared by the governor of California, because this is where I live. And so all of a sudden, the hospitals or the clinical sites were not letting students go in. And we tried doing the online thing, but it wasn't really that effective. And, and it was just like, sorry, but it's not gonna work out. So that's kind of, I realized that online virtual services, psychiatric services, would be in high demand, and I thought that was the best time for me to go back and specialize in psychiatry, and that's what I did. I enrolled in a psychiatric program, a psychiatric nurse practitioner program, and fast forward 2 years later, I graduated.
Amazing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I'm very excited to have you on. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us. This is very much in line with what I talk about on the podcast around mental health, especially around Latinas. And as we know, a lot of us are first gen. And so I think that, and we'll talk more about this, but I think we're more at risk for certain types of burnout. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that. And I'd also like to share with our listeners that Cristina is one of my coaching clients. It's been really fun to work with her. As you might know, I work with mental health providers who are interested in expanding their income and doing things outside of one-on-one individual therapy or sessions. And so Yeah, again, thank you, Cristina, for coming. So let's start by talking about what burnout is to begin with. So do you want to explain what does it mean to be burnt out?
You know, it's a very general definition by the WHO, the World Health Organization, and the definition is three parts. So one of them is when you feel exhausted, right? But it's not the type of exhaustion that you feel like, for example, after you run a marathon, right? You run a marathon, you feel exhausted, but then you recover in a couple of days. Burnout is not like that. The cycle of burnout can be very long, depending on how long your body has been dealing with burnout. And so I am going to integrate some of the 5 characteristics that I found when I did a marketing research survey. And so I would like to share this 5 because I think it's very important for first gens and just the general population to know that when it comes to burnout, there are certain traits, certain characteristics, certain personalities that are more likely to experience burnout. And so the first, well, in no particular order, one of them is hyper independence. This is the person that feels like they have to do everything themselves because no one else can do it right. The
Yes,
other one,
that is going to sound very familiar to a lot of our listeners. My very last episode before this one, when this one comes out, is about the high functioning Latina or the high functioning anxiety. And that is one of the characteristics of just like feeling like they have to do everything or it won't get done
right?
correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is exhausting. You know, you can't do everything yourself. You have to delegate and you have to save your energy so that you can really focus on the things that you want to enjoy, really.
Nope.
So the second characteristic to burnout is, or the person that is more likely to be affected by burnout is the one that uses success as a shield. This is the person that uses busyness, or getting that next degree so that they can avoid dealing with difficult feelings, difficult memories. And so this is the person that has a lot of degrees and yeah, so that's success as a shield. And
You're
the
overachiever, you're
mhm,
classic overachiever.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, and
This
actually
is this about me?
no,
Who
no, it's
sent you?
about me. It's about me. That actually, out of all the 5, that's the one that I identify with the most. I feel like being the youngest in my family, but then also being the first one to go to college. For the longest time, up until a couple years ago, it was always the objective. The goal was to get the higher degree. It was almost like I needed to get that degree to prove my worthiness. I did not have a an objective other than that. It was only until about a year ago when I started noticing the need in my community for trauma treatment that I decided I was gonna focus on helping the community. So that was kind of like my life's mission and vision that I found. And so that's kind of when I started to focus in psychiatry. So that's the success as a shield. The other one is people pleasing. People pleasing is the person who has difficulty saying no or setting boundaries. And I think specifically for first gens, myself included, up until the time that we began our first corporate job, our only point of reference is our family, the family dynamics, right? And in our family, especially us, I'm Latina Mexicana, sometimes saying no can be considered disrespectful. We are very family oriented, very community oriented, and corporate world in America is not like that. It's very individualistic. It's very productivity based, and so that clashes. It clashes with our values, and so we try to kind of prove ourselves, right? Because we have this mentality of we have to work 10 times harder than everyone else, right? And so what happens is we tend to have difficulty saying no or setting boundaries, and then fast forward a year, couple of years, you fall into this burnout spiral. And so that is people pleasing. The other trait is reactivity or impatience. And this also kind of relates to that. Once you start your first job, you tend to, once you are very tired, exhausted because you are working 10 times harder than everyone else, right? Then by the time you get home, your patience is very like that big, right? And you get triggered by little things. You get triggered by things such as, you know, the way your partner looked at you or your coworker looked at you, right? Because at this time you are resentful of the dynamics in the work setting, right? Your boss, why is my boss giving me all this work, right? Or why is my coworker not working as hard as I am? And so that's impatience / reactivity. Little things set you off. And then lastly, the always on mode. This is like right before you fall into that burnout rock bottom. The always on mode is when you are constantly feeling stress, tense, tense muscles, even when, and this is what the saddest part is, even when things are going well. I also nicknamed this one the biggest thief of your joy, because I feel that we are very, in this always on mode, we are very focused on the past and the future, right? Like what happened in the past, whatever memories we have not processed, and also the what if case scenarios of the future. A lot of gens, because I speak with gens almost on the daily across the US and sometimes even around the world, they tell me that they are thinking about worst case scenarios of the future, so they try to kind of prevent that worst case scenario from happening, but it's just a narrative that they're building in their mind because the future has not happened and the past already passed. And so, but they don't really focus in the here and now, today, celebrating those little moments, big moments.
And to be clear, that always on is something that people get stuck in, not on purpose, like they're on because they can't seem to get out of it, right?
Yeah. It's the nervous system forgets how to feel safe. And this can be very, it could cause a lot of physical manifestations, diseases. It lowers your immune system. And so I wrote an article and I was doing some research about this always on mode, and an example that I was able to come up with is that sometimes your brain reacts kind of like as if you were in the battlefield, but you're just sitting on your desk, because something as little as like an incoming email on your inbox can set you off, can increase your heart rate, can flush your face, or feel something in your gut, like that's danger. Yeah.
So these 5 traits that you mentioned, they're the 5 traits of people who are more likely to experience burnout. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that's according to, well, there is evidence-based research to support that.
Right.
But then also, I did a marketing research survey. So this is kind of how all of this started. I did a marketing research survey on trauma. The question that I asked first, gens, so trauma shows up in your life today. How does it most commonly manifest? And the top 5 answers, after I summarized and synthesized the data, were those 5 traits. And so then, I did some additional reading on them, and all of them are causes of burnout. All of them, can put a person at high risk for burnout.
It sounds like what you're saying to me is that trauma can manifest in these traits, and these traits make you very vulnerable to burnout. Therefore, there is like almost a direct or an indirect connection of trauma with burnout.
Yeah, my personal opinion is that there is. However, I was looking for evidence-based research on it, and I couldn't find it. Which, it is something that a lot of people have told me. Maybe that's why you should go back to school and get your PhD.
Yeah.
PhD
Yeah,
on.
just because the research isn't there doesn't make it not true. It just means somebody hasn't studied it yet,
Oh,
right?
yes,
And I think that's
absolutely.
the case for a lot of the things
Yeah.
that we know as first gen Latinas, as first gen children of immigrants or immigrants ourselves, or just as women of color. I think that
Mm-hmm.
a lot of our lived experience can't be validated by science because someone hasn't done it yet.
Right.
And so I think that's important to name that just because it isn't evidence based the way that the Western world likes to recognize research doesn't mean it's not true. And as a trauma therapist, this makes a lot of sense to me. I agree with you that these are, well, and you said this was evidence based, the traits, right? These are
Mm-hmm.
absolutely manifestations of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes sense to me that this puts you at higher risk for burnout.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Which, if we think about, that makes it so that first gen, my podcast is mostly focused on women, but first gen individuals are probably more at risk for burnout than non first gen.
Yep, nailed it. We are actually 1.5 to 2 times more likely to experience an episode of burnout. And here's the important thing, for all of us to know is the fact that, the average American loses every year $60,000 for an episode of burnout.
Mm,
But you see, first gens are not average. There is a lot of barriers that we have to face. There's a lot of navigation that we have to learn from scratch. There's no roadmap. We don't have what the textbooks call legacy knowledge, right?
yes.
We always go into a situation or into a new system knowing nothing,
Yes.
right? And can you imagine you go with no roadmap, no blueprint, and then you have these 5 traits? Of course, you're gonna be, a stress case, and of course, you're gonna fall in this burnout spiral.
Yeah.
And actually, just briefly, there is a model called the BDOC model, burnout during organizational change model. So this BDOC model actually traces kind of the life cycle of burnout, and it can take 6 months for you to go from like the beginning of the cycle, which is hope, and then that goes, hope starts the first gen new grad. You go get your first job, and then you start working there. Probably by the 3rd month mark or the first year, you experience frustration because you are noticing how the system is not perfect, because no system is perfect. And so then after so much frustration, that becomes anger. After that anger, that becomes apathy. And after apathy, it can become full blown rock bottom burnout. And, the down spiral is short, considering the life cycle of burnout, because even though it takes 6 months to fall to that rock bottom, full blown burnout, it can take up to 5 years. Let me repeat that again. It can take up to 5 years to recover. And even then, you don't fully recover, because you see, once you hit rock bottom, your tolerance level for stress decreases. And so this is what the person who created the model called residual burnout.
Yeah.
You
Absolutely
never
makes
go
sense.
back. Mm-hmm.
It absolutely makes sense. It's not something that a 1 week vacation is gonna get rid of. It's just not.
Yeah.
So it sounds familiar too. In the helping professions, you might have heard of compassion fatigue. But I want to go back to something you mentioned about the
Mm-hmm.
$60,000
Yes.
because already as Latinas, we make what pennies on the dollar compared to other identities, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're already losing money. And so tell me more about, you said that there's nuance because we're not the average. So it's safe to say we probably lose more than the 60K that you mentioned.
Yeah, because you see, as a first gen, and this happens a lot to Latina women, because I think I see more Latina women than I see Latino men, because it's not that they don't have trauma, but rather they're less likely to seek help, because there's that stereotype of I'm a Latino macho man, right? Like, yeah. I don't need help, I can deal
stigma.
with it. And so what happens is, as a first gen college grad, you become like the anchor to your family, right? So you're kind of like this bridge, right? This bridge sandwich generation, where not only are you taking care of your immediate family, right? Your sons, daughters, your wife, but then also being the one that makes the most money. If you're the first one, it kind of that responsibility falls on you by default, or you take it upon yourself to become that anchor for your parents. And so then you have, like, you're pretty much sustaining 2 households.
Yeah.
Right?
Or sometimes more than that, right? You're the loan officer. You're the one that, pues a ti te va mejor, so I need money, can you help me out? Or a ti te va mejor, so can you pay for mom's, X.
Right. And so and that's just monetary. But there's a cost that is non-quantifiable, and that's your health, your physical health. In fact, the participants of this BDOC model, can you believe, and this is how serious it is, and I want to make sure that people understand this, when you are stuck in a toxic environment that you think, oh, I have to withstand this, I have to push through. That's something most of the first gens that I talk to tell me every time I talk to them. I have to push through in spite of, regardless of feeling burnt out. But you know what the price is? Those people that finally accepted, okay, I need to detach myself from this environment. And that can be like a physical detachment, or it can also be like an emotional detachment. Because if you don't detach and you continue in that, even once you detach from that toxic environment, 10% of the people that left the workforce in that particular area developed cancer. 10% developed cancer.
Yeah. Stress, chronic stress, toxic stress has very, very real health implications. Yeah.
Yeah, it really does.
And I think that along with all the other pressure that we experience as first gens, it just highlights to me the importance of taking care of your well-being, not just your physical well-being. That's important, but I think that's what people think luego, like, I'm going to do exercise and I'm going to do this and that. But you also have to care for your mental and emotional and psychological well-being. And I think that this speaks to that. So we're more susceptible to burnout, tied to trauma. You spoke to us about the 5 traits. What do you think? And you can tell us a little bit more about what is the work that you do in order to help out people to either prevent this or address it if it's already happened.
Yeah, so let me tell you kind of where all of this began. Because I think it's a very interesting story that really made me realize the wisdom of ancestral healing techniques. So I feel like my journey, my professional journey, was meant to first learn the Western medicine, Western frameworks, so that I could understand, once I was ready, the wisdom of ancestral healing techniques. And it all began when I was taking EMDR. So EMDR is the eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's the go-to treatment for trauma.
Yeah. It's the bilateral stimulation for those of us who maybe haven't heard of it.
Yep. And bilateral stimulation, we do that, naturally. That's the importance of exercising. When you're walking, that is bilateral stimulation. Doing this, that is bilateral stimulation. Dancing, that's bilateral stimulation, right? And so when I was taking that course, because it's a specialized course, right?
And very expensive.
It is. It is. My work paid for it. And so when I was taking it, there was this one page that I clearly remember stating something to the effect that this tool has been around for millennia. Native Americans use it in things such as dancing, singing, drum playing. So just recently, I think within the last decade, there was evidence-based research that supported the fact that drum playing is helpful. And drum playing is being integrated in like círculos, where people who are affected by substance use, it's just like we're going back to those kind of ancestral healing techniques. And so that's where I was motivated to learn more about it. And so I did. I went back and I learned a lot about, Aztec practices and Toltec wisdom. And that's what became kind of the centerpiece of my coaching that I created. And the coaching, once it started going, a lot of first gens would ask me, like, is this something that we can get refund by our employer, or do you do workshops? And so that's how I kind of started working on that. And so the coaching became, now I do workshops for mainly nonprofit organizations, but I can serve any organization. But it just has happened that nonprofit organizations really want this because it is something unique. It is something that integrates evidence-based tools with ancestral healing practices. And lastly, the last thing that I'm working on is the masterclass series that I'm working, where I took these 5 main traits and I created a masterclass on each and every one of them, where people learn really everything they want to know about burnout, what it is, what it isn't, how it affects the hyper-independent person, but then also how you can build a shield to protect you from falling into that burnout down spiral.
Awesome. So you offer all of these things for community to address burnout from a cultural relevant lens. So you are someone who is speaking directly to people like you and I, first gen individuals who might hear about burnout and might hear about how to get out of it, but this sounds like it's much more culturally nuanced. And you said you bring in ancestral healing. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so things such as smudging when it's in person, drum playing. I do integrate that tool, which is Western frameworks called bilateral stimulation, but I can use it in my role as a coach or educator, so that I can empower people with that knowledge so they can practice it on their own.
And I just happen to know that you are very passionate about teaching a lot about how these ancestral ways of healing, or even these ancestral ways of explaining things that the Western world calls burnout and that the Western world calls disorders. You have a very different view. Well,
Yeah.
I don't know if different is the right way to describe it, but you have a much more culturally grounded way of describing this based on what we know from our culture.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, something that I was mind blown as I was researching, and this is something that you have to be very intentional. Like, I really had to go and look at the respected books that people wrote about Aztec, the history of the Aztecs and the practices. And so I came across the tripartite soul framework from the Aztecs perspective. And this tripartite soul framework, as I was reading about it, that's when I was mind blown, because as I was reading, I could think about 3 or 4 frameworks, Western frameworks that align perfectly well with the Aztecs tripartite soul framework. So the Aztecs believed that we had 3 souls. One resides in our head, that's the tonali. One resides in our heart, that's the tejolia, and one resides in our gut, like our gut, our liver, and that's the ixchotl. And so those are Aztec words. And so what happens is our tonali gives us that clarity, you know. It's almost like we are beings that are energized by the sun. So the sun, you know, hits the top of our head, what we call the chirimoya, and it gives us clarity. And then all of that energy flows down to our heart. Our heart is the soul of connection. That connection that we have with our loved ones, with the community, and with the connection with what we are meant to do in this world. And then lastly, we have the ixchotl, which is the gut soul, and that's all about instinct. It's pure instinct. This is the one that, you know, just wants to protect you. Its priority is like food, protection, and, you know, reproduction, right? So it really it aligns with like theories such as the triune brain theory, the polyvagal theory, even the BDOC, a little bit of the BDOC framework that I just talked about regarding the cycle of burnout. And so that's kind of what I integrate, and that's how I explain it to clients. What happens when your souls are not in alignment, meaning your thoughts are exactly what you feel in your heart and what your gut soul is telling you. So for example, sometimes, you know, clients that I have talked to say things to me like, I feel it in my bones that I am meant to be a doctor, for example, a doctor, public speaker, but my mind does not think so, you know? It's almost like this disconnect. And so through the ancestral healing techniques, through the bilateral stimulation, from the dancing, the singing, and the drumming, we talk to our souls. In this ancestral model, we talk to our souls so that they can go back into alignment. And I'm happy to report that I have done a couple of pilot groups in my coaching, and everyone that graduated from the program, you know, does believe that once they completed the program, they feel like their souls are in alignment, and they have talked to their gut soul, you know, that instinctual soul that wants to protect you, and it's the one that is triggered when you are in this always on mode.
I love that, and I've said it before on the podcast that therapy is great, but it is not our only way to heal. And our ancestors had, and thankfully we've been able to kind of learn a lot about the knowledge that they had already and have passed on. And if we open our minds and our hearts to it, there are so many ways, so many paths towards healing. And so thank you for sharing that. I really think that this is something that is beneficial for people to learn about if you are either experiencing burnout or even if you want to prevent it. I think that this is incredibly crucial to learn and implement the things that you advise. So told me that you offer workshops, you offer working with orgs, you do coaching. Tell us more about your coaching.
Yeah, so the coaching, it's a 3-month program where I take them through the cycle of burnout and empower them with the tools and the knowledge and the practices for them to realign their souls. And typically, it's kind of what Western medicine would call negative cognitions. And the way I approach it is actually from a Toltec wisdom framework. And all of this is known through the series of books by Don Miguel Ruiz, you know, because I want to give credit where credit is due. He wrote a few books. The main one where I get all of this information was The 4 Agreements. And so in that book, he talks about how, from a Toltec perspective, metaphorically, they saw our mind as being hijacked by a parasite. This parasite with multiple heads, just like speaking words or thoughts, giving you thoughts, right? But these thoughts are not necessarily yours. These are kind of survival scripts that were passed down from generation to generation. And you didn't really have a say. You just agreed, that, okay, this is called the book. Okay, that's called the book, right? But there's three main heads to this parasite. And these three main heads include the judge, the victim, and the agreements. So the judge is these thoughts that we get that say to us, you should, you shouldn't, right? Do this, don't do that, you're bad. And then the victim is those thoughts that we get on the daily sometimes that tell us, like, poor me, why did this happen to me, everything me. And so what we do is we work on removing the heads of that parasite, getting rid of that parasite that is hijacking your brain, using that alignment of the soul's script from our ancestors. And with a few sessions in my program, we meet once weekly the first month, and then bi-weekly the last 2 months. But one of my clients told me that with 5 sessions of the work that we did, she was actually able to make more progress than she had made using other services. And I want to clarify that this is, it's not replacing, the psychiatry services. It's not replacing therapy, but it's a complementary service, and from an ancestral lens.
Yes, I love that. While you're talking, I'm in my mind, I'm thinking of it through mental health, like generational trauma, the parasite and the things that you inherit and things like that. That's amazing. I love that. So you offer the individual coaching, but then you're also offering a masterclass series. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so this masterclass series started kind of like as a personal project to empower my community in a very affordable manner. This masterclass consists of 4 hours total, but we meet once weekly for 1 hour each week, and we go over the 5 main characteristics that we talked about: the hyperdependence, success as a shield,
people pleasing,
impatience / reactivity, and the always on mode. So I created a specific masterclass on them individually, because there is so much to talk about just with them individually, about the why and how that leads to burnout, and how to move away from that, how the tools that they can use, the scripts that they can replace, because it's survival scripts that were passed down from generation to generation. And this is the important thing to remember, that you see, the scripts that kind of we think about, they were passed down from our parents. But you see, it's not that they purposely wanted to pass down scripts that perhaps were not that helpful, but rather those were scripts that were passed down from their previous generation. And I think one of the biggest things to acknowledge here is, I think, the gaslighting of what our ancestors suffered, the atrocities that they suffered. Acknowledge the idea that there was trauma. And trauma, now, the whole field of epigenetics shows, is passed down from generation to generation.
Yeah, historical trauma is very real and still has an impact on us. I hear a lot of people say, what's that got to do with me? That was 500 years ago. Believe me, it still has a lot to do with you.
Yep. Absolutely. And it's these scripts that are passed down from generation to generation. And I think one of the biggest, eye-opening things that I've realized in this work is that when I talk to first gens, I want to say maybe 95% of us, or probably more, 99% of us, can only go back just to our grandparents as far as our lineage. Like, I don't even know what ethnic group I belong to, because I was raised in Morelos, Mexico, and I can assume that the groups around there, because of our facial traits, facial characteristics, it could be Zapoteca. But I won't know for sure, because, my ancestors, my lineage, were so busy just trying to survive that they didn't have time to sit down and tell stories, which is kind of like the way that knowledge was passed down through our ancestors. But then, we did learn how to read and write, and still, like, they did not have time to sit down and write that down. And I think that's something important for us to begin doing.
Absolutely. I'm with you. I don't know all of my grandparents, even who they were. I only know some of them. And like you said, from the area that my parents are from, I can assume that I'm likely Purepecha, but I won't know. And it's something that definitely impacts us in that way. We lose some history, we lose culture, but also the epigenetics that we don't know about that may have been passed down, and the generational trauma that has been passed down. There's so much of it.
Yeah, and it's important to acknowledge that.
Yes.
It's important to verbalize that. Verbalize what our ancestors, and when I say ancestors, I mean those that came before us. It's not necessarily one particular group, right? It is just those that came before us, because you see, I subscribe to the belief, and this is something that kind of unified the Toltecs, the view of the Toltecs and the view of the Aztecs, is that we are all related. There's this, and I'm going to say this in Spanish and I'll translate. Estamos hechos de la misma manta. We are all made out of the same fabric. Right? When I look at myself in the mirror, I'm not just seeing myself. I'm also seeing my brothers and my sisters, right? Black, brown, purple. Yeah. It's we're all related. And by us acknowledging what happened to us, it's almost kind of preventative. Makes us realize, okay, this happened. I'm going to acknowledge it. I am going to thank it, for leaving the knowledge that it left. And because of it, I'm going to be better moving forward, right? Because if you don't name it, if you don't give it a name, it just stays there,
Yeah, in therapy, we call it name it to tame it, right?
I love it.
and it's true.
Yeah.
So what do people do if they want to attend your masterclass series, or if they want to be your coaching client?
So they can go to mariacristinacoaching.com. And I have all my masterclasses listed there, and any future, services that I offer will all be posted there. And my contact information will also be there.
How much is the masterclass? Do you want to share that?
Oh, yeah. The masterclass is like the best price ever. It's $27.
Amazing. You can't beat that. Then that's for the whole series.
For the whole series, yes. Wow. And it's not going to be like that forever. I only decided that it's going to be like this because this is the very first time I'm offering it.
Yeah.
And so, anyone... and it's also something, I timed it so that it comes out in August, which is kind of like around the time that people are starting to go back to school. And so, if you are a parent who wants to empower your children that are getting ready to go to college, this is something for them to know, because the very first episode of Burnout happens when we start college.
And that's also in line with, this too, that it's in line with when the first episode of, for people who live with schizophrenia is usually when they go off to college too. It's high stress situation.
It really is. but it's not as stressful as it will be once they graduate from college and they actually go into the corporate world.
Yes.
And so that is something that I'm simmering on, because I do want to work on additional master classes to ensure that I cover like all of the generations, because our experiences are the same but yet a little different when it comes to the various generations. Like, Gen Alpha is growing up, they're observing their parents. The Gen Zs, they are 98%. They just, a recent study showed that 98% are affected by burnout. And I think part of that was the fact that they hit burnout very early because of the pandemic.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, and then, millennials, Gen X, baby boomers, we all experience it differently, so that's what I'm simmering on. But for now, the master class, go to my website, Maria Cristina Coaching, and you will see all the details there.
Amazing. Yes, I will be there. I absolutely want to learn more details. So hopefully, if you're listening to this, you recognize the amazing opportunity to learn and to really help yourself and those that you love. Because when you're educated and you share that education, that can really make a difference for people.
Yep.
Now, really briefly, Cristina, I want to talk about you being my coaching client.
Yes.
Cristina has been a star coaching client. I really admire her passion, her commitment. I'm really impressed by everything that you do. I really do admire and respect the work that you do. But I'm wondering if you would speak to the experience of being coached as a mental health professional.
Well, I think the difference is in the delivery. Right? Like, you have to find the person that, gives you that good vibe, that you feel that you will learn from, and that is worth, what you're paying for. And so when I met you and, when I saw what you were offering, I knew, that the price was right. I knew that I was going to get a lot out of it because I was just starting my journey. And you've been doing this. You've been an entrepreneur for a couple of years, right? If not more.
Yeah,
and
more.
So that is one of the things that first gens that I'm practicing what I'm preaching. One of the things that I talk about in the masterclass is the importance of building your support system. And part of that support system is finding mentors, finding someone that can help you navigate that process, because again, there is no legacy roadmap, right? I didn't have parents who had businesses. I didn't grow up in the business world. So the second best thing I can do is work with someone who has done it, who can kind of give me direction, go this way, no, don't do that thing, and someone that I can call or text whenever. I don't know if you remember the very first time when I had to submit a proposal for a nonprofit organization that wanted me to do a workshop, which it came through. But if I didn't have you, I would be like Googling or chat GPTing it. And there's nothing like that connection of actually having someone that you can text, having someone that has walked that path before you and can help you navigate that process.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure working with you. And so if you're a mental health provider and you're looking for that type of support, hit me up. I really enjoy doing it, and I think that there's so much more out there than the Western world tells us that there is in regards to being a mental health provider. As you can see, Cristina is doing something that you won't learn in grad school, but it's super helpful for our people, and it's more in line, I would think, to in line with our culture and how we see the world. And nothing better than to get it from someone who gets it, someone who can relate, because we've been there too.
Yeah.
right? So thank you for that. I can't wait for your master class. I will be there, like I said, and I hope that the people listening to us will be able to sign up and be there too. Thank you so much, Cristina, for being on. I will put your links in the show notes for people. So if you're interested, you can click on the link and sign up. But other than that, thank you, and I'll see you all in the next episode. Thank you for listening. This podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only. Nothing shared in this podcast constitutes therapy, clinical advice, or a therapeutic relationship. Listening to this podcast does not establish a provider-client relationship, and if you're experiencing a mental health crisis or in need of clinical support, please contact a licensed mental health professional or call or text 988 Crisis Hotline.